Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's video. Today I will be sharing with you the process of hat making, and more specifically, the making of this lovely 1790s Duchess hat. I'm so glad you decided to join me today, so let's jump right in. So today I'm going to be making a 1790s hat, and I'm going to be using the instructions and pattern out of, yet again, one of my favorite books, The American Duchess's Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking. So I'm going to be following this pattern and all the instructions that are included to make this lovely hat to go with my 1790s round gown and open robe. So I will take you along with that process with me today. I'm hoping it doesn't take me too long. It would be nice to have just a weekend project. I haven't gotten much sewing done lately, so it'd be really fun to get something accomplished. So I just went to pull out some basic supplies, and I just realized that this is the only wire I have. So for millinery, you want like a 19 gauge wire, and I honestly don't even know what gauge this wire is. It's leftover wire that I had purchased for making this Lord of the Rings elven inspired crown that I made it, honestly, I don't know how many years ago. I was probably only about 16 years old, so about 8 years ago, I guess now. It's a really nice wire to work with for making projects like that, but I think it's going to be too soft for the structure of a hat, but I'm going to attempt it. If I need to, what I'll do is I'll double up the wire because I have tons of it, and since it's such a fine, thin gauge, if I double it up, it won't add too much bulk, and I can always just stitch around it to tie them together. Or if I'm feeling really brave, maybe use a little hot glue. I don't know. But I'm going to attempt using it because I'd really rather not purchase any wire at the moment. So I'll attempt using it and see how it behaves. So what I have here is my buckram for making the hat. What I'm going to do first is take the pattern from the book and kind of scale it out and then just roughly trace it onto the buckram and then cut it directly. I'm not going to pattern it out. It's a really simple pattern, so I'm not going to bother storing it in my patterns folders. I'm just going to go back to this and refer to it whenever I need to. Then that way I can make adjustments if I want to make the brim larger or if I'm making a hat for somebody. I'm just going to quickly measure this out and trace it onto the buckram and then cut that out. Here, as you can see, I am enlarging the pattern and tracing it out like I said. I did, however, make a mistake and I followed the pattern exactly, not paying attention and noticing that this is on the fold. I was just so excited to jump right in. I made one of the most basic mistakes of anything in sewing or hat making and did not put the pattern on the fold. So I traced it out onto tracing paper and marked it all out to make it even, and then I moved it into the opposite direction so I could create the pattern on the fold and come out with a full brim instead of a half brim, as you can see there. And then I made, again, another mistake and cut the brim in half along that line. It was just not my day, but I cut that out and I'll use it somewhere else for another hat, hopefully, and I used it as a pattern for this one and made sure when I cut it, I went really slow and I cut the brim whole this time, finally. So now that I have all my pattern pieces cut out, I'm ready to go on to covering them with fabric. I also need to choose a fabric. I have not decided what I want to do yet for that. The hat is supposed to match this round gown and this open robe. So I do have fabric left of the round gown material, but I'm not sure if I want to make my hat that specific. I was thinking of using maybe more of a contrasting material, like one of these lovely corals or burgundies in the flowers on this silk, just to add a little bit more character to the ensemble and not make it so dress specific, because I wouldn't mind making a new round gown in the future. This one I wasn't immensely happy with how it turned out, just because the fabric I used was a little bit finicky. So I'd love to make one out of like a linen or a cotton eventually, and I would like to be able to use that hat for another project, so I might make it just out of a contrasting material that would work well with, say, a white or like a light blue round gown, something a little more neutral. So I'm gonna check my stash and see what I have and come back. The only fabric I found in my stash that I think will work is this right here. I don't even know what it is. It's kind of has a silky texture to it, but it's more of like a cotton, but like I don't know if they call it like a polished cotton, but it's not really polished cotton, like a lining polished cotton. So I don't know. I really like the sheen of it. I just find it a little boring. I don't know. It does match the flowers nicely. And I'm thinking what I can do is make the base hat out of this fabric, and then it'll match with 1790's projects. And then I can just change out the embellishment on it. What I might do for this instance is make say my ribbons and bows out of this silk to match the open robe. I'm going to cut out the fabric pieces. So now I got most of my fabric cut out. So the next thing I'm going to do is whip stitch the millinery wire around the brim of the hat. So some people tend to stitch their wire on with a sewing machine using a zigzag stitch. I have attempted that before. I don't prefer the method because I just find it's a really good way to break needles and possibly bend the shaft of your machine. So what I like to do, I find it easier to manipulate the wire and the brim of the hat if I hand stitch it. It's a tedious process and it's really hard on the fingers, but I find it to be almost easier in the end. So the next step for me is to overlap the edges of the crown of the hat, and it's got to make sure it matches the circumference of the brim well. I don't want it to be too small or too large, so I'm going to just kind of fit it in here, making sure it lines up around all the edges. And a little bit extra is okay because I can always trim it out, but I don't want to have to unpick the seams and take in the brim if I don't have to, because this stuff is pretty tricky to stitch on. So I'm going to just probably line it up by about this much here. I'm sure to leave myself a lot of extra seam allowance because I wasn't sure how it was going to line up. So I'm just going to stitch that down like so. Here I have the crown top, and what I'm going to do is cut along the edge and clip the edge inward. So approximately, I gave myself about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I'm going to do approximately 1/2 inch and fold those clipped edges inward so that I can fit it into the crown of the hat and it sits in smoothly. And then it's all depressed in, and then the edge is even. This is one instance where a thimble is really useful because this buckram is extremely thick, and if you try to poke through it, you just end up driving the blunt end of the needle into your finger, which I've done many times. So I essentially have a callus, but since I haven't done much hand sewing, especially through thick materials in the past while, it's worn down a little bit, so it's not as thick. So I definitely need to use a thimble, but I tend to use one for this even when I have my callus because it just drives right into your finger and it hurts really bad. So, and I don't want to have a cut where I'll be getting blood on my finished fashion fabric because that just completely destroys the look. Now I'm going to cover the crown and crown band of the hat in fabric. So I already pinned this in place, centered it, and smoothed it out. And I also have to add the band to it. I'm just going to stitch this all down with just large basting stitches, smoothing it out as I go, just to make sure it catches on, and then it's I can remove the pins and it all sits smoothly. And it is secured in place. Now that I've gone ahead and basted the top crown part on, I'm going to take the band and place that on. So what I need to do is, normally if you have a raw edge, you would just fold it under like this and then line it up, which I haven't decided if I want to do that or leave this nice textured edge. I think I will fold it under. So I'm going to go iron that so it's a little bit easier to manage. So I went ahead and ironed that, and I'm just going to line up the raw edge of the fabric with the edge of the buckram here and just pin this in place. I'm going to be having the edges even as possible, just like I did with the crown band and the top crown when I was stitching them together. I'm going to do the same with the fabric all the way around, like so. So I've gone ahead and smoothed it out and pinned it down all around, and then also trimmed the edge because I had a little bit of excess fabric just to make sure it went around completely. And I folded that edge under so it's nice and smooth. So now I'm going to go and do small stitches all the way around, starting from here and continuing all the way back to here. Now that this is completed and stitched in place all the way around and down, I'm going to set it aside for now, and I will begin working on the brim of the hat. So the wire I placed on it earlier, this is the top layer of the fabric. So as you can see, there's about a 1-inch seam allowance all the way around. I need to cut out where the crown of the hat will sit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I just went and left a little bit of extra fabric along this line on the seam allowance where the crown's going to sit, so I can clip the edges and that it'll have it sit smoothly on the inside once I tuck it under and stitch it. That's actually the next step, is to stitch all the way around on the brim, the inside of the brim here, where the crown will be attached. So I just need to do a quick running stitch all the way around. Okay, so that is stitched around the edge here, and I went ahead and clipped my seam allowance so that can be turned in later. And now what I'm going to do is turn the excess fabric here of the seam allowance, smoothing it over the wire edge and just pinning it in place as I go. Now that is pinned in place, I am going to prick stitch along the edge where the wire is, so just at the very edge here, catching the fabric just inside the wire, so it's really close to the edge as possible. It's all stitched down around the edge. I'm not extremely happy with how smooth it's sitting. It's a little lumpy because I had to double up the wire, but that's okay. It'll be flipped up, and there's a good chance I'll be putting a lot of bows and ribbons on here anyways. So it's not a huge deal, and it'll be on the inside mostly. You'll be seeing the underside, which will have a nice pleated lining. I did realize that I made a mistake and didn't include a seam allowance in here because the pattern didn't really indicate it that clearly. But something I should know, I've made so many hats in the past, I should know that I need that extra seam allowance to clip and turn it upwards. So I have managed to get like 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, because you want these pieces all to sit up upwards this way actually, so that when you place the crown on top of it, you have something to stitch down to around the edge. I'm really not going to have that much to grab onto, but it's not a huge deal. I will make it work. I have the fabric, which will grab onto it, and I'll just go underneath and grab just the edge of the hat here and make that stitch it on. It will work. It doesn't sit quite as smoothly, and it's a little harder to maneuver, but I'll make it work. The fabric under the brim, I'm cutting the exact same shape as I did for the brim fabric. However, it is going to be almost double the width. And I'm going to gather up the whole edge, and I'm going to mark the hole for the crown of the hat. So what I want to do is gather it up so that it'll fit, and I'll be gathering it up down here. Just a little update. I have put the fabric onto the brim of the hat. It's all stitched in place. The crown is stitched to the brim, and the brim is now covered. I didn't end up taking long with that process because I wanted to do some sewing on the couch in front of the TV, and it's really hard for me to film there. So I just went ahead and did it. I followed the instructions in the book fairly closely. They were a bit confusing, but essentially I took right sides of the fabric together and I stitched them. So right sides together, stitched them. And then after I went all the way around and gathered it and adjusted the gathers, then I flipped the fabric to the inside of the hat and then continued to adjust the gathers, then gathered the inside of the crown of the hat. So the inside circle of the brim, where it attaches to the crown, and gathered it down. And I'm going to need to cut the excess fabric. I don't know if I will bother because it really doesn't matter because my whole head's not going to be going in here anyways, and it doesn't really add that much bulk. So I might just leave it, and then it can be adjusted eventually if I need to. I don't think I'll ever need to adjust it, but it's not doing any harm in there, so I'll probably just leave it. Now all I need to do is stitch this down. So I'm going to stitch to the crown, and then when I'm done that, the next step will be to decorate the hat, and then the final step is putting the lining in, because it's a lot easier to attach your decorations and ribbons and everything else when the lining's not in, because you don't have one less layer to stitch through, and then the lining also helps the mess that decorating it will create. So my decisions of decorating await me, and I will show you what I come up with. So last night I decorated the hat, and this is what I decided on. I just wanted to go lots of different shades of like pink and peach, something really fun and light, and it reminds me of like dessert in a way. So that's what I went with, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. The only thing left to do is put the lining into the crown of the hat, and that's really basic. All I'm going to do is cut a rectangular piece of fabric the same length as the crown all the way around, with a little bit left for seam allowance, and then I'm going to just stitch it into this excess fabric here just on the edge. So I'm going to fold under the seam allowance and just catch stitch it all the way around, and then at the top I'm going to be doing a hem, stitching it down and then leaving it with a little space so I can put some string in there, and that'll make a drawstring so it'll close at the top and finish in here so that you won't see any of this raw buckram or stitching or anything like that. That is all I have left to do. I won't bother filming that process because it's relatively simple and it's not much different than anything else I've done, but this is the finished hat as of right now. I won't have any worn photos of it when this video goes up because I will not be photographing this outfit with the robe and round gown until the springtime. I really want to do it when there's fresh leaves on the trees. Right now all I have is a lot of snow and very, very deep snow at that. So, and I don't have any nice backdrops to take pictures in, so I won't have any worn photos for a bit. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you liked it, a thumbs up and a subscribe would be really appreciated. If you'd like to see more content like this, please let me know down in the comments below. I really enjoyed this process. Hat making is one of my favorite and least favorite things to do at the same time. I love the finished product, and it really just find it ties costumes together, and it's just really fun to accessorize. So if you enjoyed it, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week with a new video.